In every true crime case, there are moments that seem ordinary until you look closer. A quiet store, two co-workers, a normal closing routine, and then a night that unravels into one of the most disturbing betrayals imaginable. This is the story of a friendship that shattered, a crime that was staged with chilling precision, and a truth that refused to stay buried. The night of March 11, 2011 began like any other closing shift at the Lululemon Athletica store in Bethesda, Maryland. Jonna Murray, a dedicated and respected sales leader, followed her routine with precision. She was known for her discipline, honesty, and calm presence. That evening, she closed the store with Brittany Norwood, a newer employee whose work performance had been under quiet observation. Nothing about the final minutes of their shift suggested that within hours, the store would become the center of one of the most disturbing cases in Maryland's history. Earlier that week, internal loss prevention concerns had quietly begun surfacing. Certain items had gone missing, and during a standard bag check, Jonna noticed a pair of leggings with a price tag still attached inside Brittany's bag. According to protocol, Jonna documented the discovery and informed management. She didn't confront Brittany directly, and she didn't accuse her. But Brittany was not oblivious. She sensed Jonna had noticed something and understood that when management investigated, she could lose her position, something she couldn't afford. To Jonna, it was just company policy. To Brittany, it was a threat to her reputation, her income, and her future. After the store closed around 9 p.m., the two women left the building and went their separate ways. Jonna drove home, unaware that she would soon be called back. Brittany, however, already had a plan forming, one filled with desperation and fear rather than logic. She realized she needed a way to contain the situation, to regain control, to stop the consequences she believed were coming, and so she made a calculated move. Brittany claimed she had forgotten her Metro card at the store. It was a believable excuse, simple and harmless. She called Jonna, knowing her coworker was responsible and caring enough to return. And true to her character, Jonna did. Around 10:05 p.m., she parked outside the Lululemon store once again and unlocked the door to let Brittany in. What happened in the minutes that followed would later be reconstructed through forensic evidence, footprints, tool markings, and the violent state of the crime scene. But in that moment, only two people truly knew what took place, and one of them would not survive to tell the truth. When investigators eventually pieced together the timeline, they found compelling indicators that the confrontation between Jonna and Brittany began shortly after Jonna re-entered the store. It wasn't explosive at first. It was tense, heated, and emotional. Jonna, known for her integrity, may have tried to reason with Brittany, offering honesty and accountability instead of punishment. But Brittany, with a history of shoplifting accusations from her college years and previous employment, felt cornered. She wasn't just afraid of losing her job, she feared the label she had worked hard to hide. The argument escalated. Voices rose. Apple Store employees next door would later report hearing two women arguing, the sound of a struggle, and at one point someone pleading for help. No male voices were heard, which would become one of the earliest cracks in Brittany's future story. The store was filled with silence, broken only by sharp, frantic movements and the sound of objects falling. For reasons driven entirely by panic and fear, Brittany launched into a violent attack on Jonna. Perhaps she intended only to silence her, to stop her from telling management. But once it began, the situation spiraled into something far more brutal than anyone could have imagined. In the back room of the store, there was a small toolbox containing everyday tools used for fixtures and store maintenance. A hammer, a wrench, a box cutter, a multi-tool knife. These everyday objects suddenly became weapons. The assault on Jonna was relentless. Forensic specialists would later determine that the attack lasted nearly 20 minutes, an unimaginably long time in a violent struggle. Jana thought back with everything she had. She had more than 100 defensive wounds on her arms, hands, and body, showing how desperately she tried to protect herself and escape. The scene told the story no witness could. Blood patterns across the floor, walls, and even the ceiling showed movement, impact, resistance, and repeated blows. Every corner of the small storeroom reflected the chaos of a life-and-death struggle. Jana's fatal injury, a deep, devastating wound to her neck, finally ended the horrifying attack. The brutality did not come from someone who panicked in a single moment. It came from someone who kept going, again and again, long after escape or retreat had been possible. With Jana dead, Brittany found herself standing in the aftermath of something she could no longer undo. She didn't call for help. She didn't reach out to authorities or attempt to save Jana. Instead, she shifted instantly into survival mode, into a mindset where covering the truth mattered more than accepting what she had done. Her mind went to staging. Her focus went to deception. Her next steps were calculated. She moved Jana's car away from the store to create the illusion of an outside attacker. She dragged, shifted, and scattered items across the store to make the scene look like a robbery gone wrong. She found a pair of large men's-size 14 shoes that belonged to the store and walked through the blood, planting false footprints. She tore both their clothes to imply a sexual assault that never happened. She inflicted superficial wounds on herself, cuts, bruises, and bindings that appeared dramatic but lacked depth and severity. In the final step of her plan, she zip-tied her own wrists and ankles to mimic a hostage who had narrowly survived. Then she waited in the dark, surrounded by the destruction she had created, until someone would discover her. The next morning, that person was Rachel, the store manager, who walked into what she believed was a robbery scene, but quickly realized something far more horrific had happened. Jana was dead. Brittany was alive, but nothing about her story would hold up for long.
When police arrived at the Lululemon store on the morning of March 12, 2011, they were met with a scene that was chaotic, violent, and deeply unsettling. Blood covered the floors, splattered across walls, and streaked even onto the ceiling. Clothing racks were overturned, mannequins lay scattered, and tools were spread around the room. At first glance, it looked like a robbery that had escalated into a brutal assault. But the officers quickly noticed the details that didn't quite align with that assumption. Jana Murray's body was found in the back room, lifeless and heavily wounded. Nearby, Brittany Norwood lay bound in zip ties, appearing fragile, injured, and traumatized. She trembled, her voice unsteady, giving officers the impression of a surviving victim who had endured a night of terror. Her pants were cut, her clothing torn, and she appeared shaken beyond words. At first, her survival seemed like a miracle, but detectives, trained to observe even the smallest inconsistencies, began noticing unusual elements almost immediately. Brittany's bindings looked oddly loose. The cuts on her body were shallow compared to Jana's catastrophic injuries. Even the way she was positioned felt staged, not like someone abandoned by violent attackers, but more like someone arranging herself to appear helpless. Still, investigators followed procedure and moved her to the hospital for examination. It was there she first shared her account of the attack. According to her, after Jana returned to help her retrieve her forgotten Metro card, two masked men dressed in black forced their way into the store. They allegedly assaulted both women, verbally and physically, cutting their clothes, making threats, and attacking Jana more severely than they attacked her. Brittany claimed one of the intruders yelled her home address, information he supposedly found in her purse, before sparing her life and killing Jana. She said they tied her up, cut her clothes, assaulted her, and left her bound in the bathroom overnight. It was a shocking story, and detectives initially documented it carefully. But even as they wrote down her words, they found themselves questioning parts of the narrative. Something didn't feel right. A crucial break came from an unexpected source, the Apple store next door. Employees there worked late that same night, often staying past closing to prepare for product launches and updates. When detectives interviewed them, several employees recalled hearing strange, disturbing sounds coming from the Lululemon wall. Not the voices of multiple attackers, just two women arguing. They heard a struggle, furniture crashing, and at one point a woman screaming for help. One employee admitted hearing cries like, "God help me," but didn't intervene, assuming it was some kind of internal dispute or training scenario. Not a single person heard the deep voices of men or the sounds of multiple male attackers. This testimony directly contradicted Brittany's story. The police then began examining the physical evidence more closely. The crime scene, though chaotic, was filled with clues. The blood patterns told a story, one of movement between aisles, of struggle, of defensive motion, and of someone attempting to obscure their tracks. Footprints became a major piece of evidence. Large, bloody shoe impressions, men's size 14, were found throughout the store. At first, these prints seemed to support Brittany's story about male attackers. But when investigators located the shoes themselves, they discovered something damning. The size 14 shoes belonged to the store. They weren't stolen or brought in by outsiders. They were part of Lululemon's standard display inventory. In addition, smaller footprints, matching Brittany's shoe size, were found alongside them. Even more telling, these smaller prints overlapped paths in ways that suggested Brittany was moving around the store after Jana was already incapacitated. Outside the store, no footprints were found at all. No tire tracks, no signs of forced entry. No indication whatsoever that two men ever entered or left the building. The forensic team then analyzed the wounds on both women. Jana had endured a horrific attack, over 331 wounds inflicted by multiple tools. Brittany, on the other hand, had superficial cuts, some of which appeared self-inflicted. None of the wounds suggested prolonged struggle. None matched the violent pattern she described. Doctors also confirmed there was no evidence of sexual assault on neither woman. Brittany's claims about being assaulted and violated by two men collapsed instantly under medical examination. DNA testing added another blow to her story. No male DNA was found anywhere inside the store. Not on the weapons, not on the clothing, not on the victims, not on surfaces where attackers would have touched. What they did find was consistent with only two people being present, Jana and Brittany. The contradictions piled up rapidly. Detectives brought Brittany back for questioning. This time her account shifted slightly. She tried to explain gaps in her memory, claiming she was traumatized, claiming she couldn't recall certain details. But investigators had done down this road before. Trauma can distort memory, yes, but trauma does not invent shoe prints, move cars, clean surfaces, bind wrists nicely, or create staged scenes. The inconsistencies were too many. As investigators continued to collect evidence, they learned more about Brittany's history. During her time in college, she was accused multiple times of theft from her soccer teammates. It eventually led to her expulsion. At a previous job in a hotel, similar issues surfaced. She had been caught stealing before. These weren't isolated incidents. They were patterns, personality traits, behavioral habits. And suddenly, everything made sense. The stolen leggings in her bag, her fear of losing this job, her panic when she believed she would be reported to management. Slowly, a new theory emerged. There were no masked men. There was no robbery. This was a confrontation between coworkers that turned violent, followed by a desperate attempt to hide the truth. Investigators began reconstructing the timeline of the night. Jana trusted Brittany enough to return to the store alone with her. What she didn't know was that Brittany was already preparing for a confrontation. Once the argument escalated and Brittany attacked her, everything spiraled. The scene was staged to look chaotic, but forensic patterns revealed choreography. Objects placed, tools used, footprints manipulated, all to support Brittany's lie. As investigators gathered more evidence, their suspicion grew, and by midweek, they knew they had enough to challenge her account directly. The investigation was no longer about finding two masked men.
As the investigation continued, detectives realized that every new piece of evidence pushed them further away from Brittany's story and closer to a darker, more calculated truth. The puzzle pieces were coming together with alarming clarity. They now believed the attack had not been a split-second decision or the work of unknown intruders, but a desperate act by someone trying to protect her own reputation at any cost. The turning point came when detectives decided to reconstruct the timeline of events in detail. They studied surveillance footage from the Apple Store, which captured the exterior of the Lululemon shop. It showed Jana returning around 10:05 p.m., parking her car, and re-entering the store. But what it didn't show was anyone else following her. No masked men, no suspicious figures, no vehicles lingering nearby. The area was calm, the sidewalk empty, the street quiet. In a busy district filled with cameras, not a single angle captured the presence of the attackers Brittany described. A crime like the one she detailed, two armed and violent men forcing themselves into a store, would have left more than sound. It would have left visuals, witnesses, panic, motion. Instead, all the evidence pointed to a silent, private confrontation between two co-workers behind closed doors. The investigators then revisited the audio accounts from Apple Store employees. These testimonies were crucial. Several employees said they heard female voices, two women arguing intensely. One voice sounded distressed, pleading. Another sounded aggressive and forceful. There was crashing, thumping, and a final desperate cry for help. But none of the sounds indicated multiple attackers or the presence of men. In a building with thin walls and a late-night staff next door, the absence of male voices was more than suspicious, it was damning. With these audio reports, detectives could now approximate the moments of struggle. They determined that Jana fought back fiercely, resisting her attacker with everything she had. The blood patterns supported this. High-impact spatter on walls indicated blows delivered while both women were moving. Drag marks suggested Jana tried to crawl or escape. Deep pools of blood in multiple locations revealed she changed positions repeatedly, fighting for her life. Tools recovered from the store helped complete the picture. Jana's injuries corresponded to a wrench, a hammer, a box cutter, and other metal instruments kept inside the store. None of these tools belonged to outsiders. They were all store property and easily accessible to employees. A random robbery team would not know exactly where to find these tools, nor would they waste time switching between them. The use of multiple weapons pointed directly to one attacker with full access to the store layout. Investigators also found evidence that some weapons had been washed or partially wiped. That detail suggested an attempt to clean or hide evidence, not something panicked intruders would typically do during an escape. Instead, it supported the idea that the attacker stayed long after Jana was incapacitated, staging and reorganizing the crime scene. One of the most revealing forensic discoveries involved the footprints. The large size 14 prints were initially believed to belong to male attackers. But forensic specialists examined the stride patterns and weight distribution. They noticed inconsistencies characteristic of someone trying to mimic a larger gait. The wearer seemed unfamiliar with walking in oversized shoes, leading to awkward angles and uneven pressure distribution. When detectives located the shoes inside the store and tested them for DNA and blood evidence, all signs pointed to Brittany. She had worn them after the attack, stepping repeatedly through blood pools, creating a second set of tracks to confuse the investigation. Additionally, the smaller footprints, matching Brittany's size, were found in locations where Jana had already bled out. This meant Brittany moved through those areas after the fatal attack, further proving she wasn't a bound victim the entire night. The next major contradiction came from Brittany's claim about the intruders finding her home address. She said they found it in her purse and threatened her by shouting it aloud. But detectives noticed something critical during evidence collection. Her purse was neatly placed, not rifled through. The contents were tidy, undisturbed, and arranged. No one had rummaged inside it. The surface showed no signs of forceful contact by multiple hands. This revelation was devastating to Brittany's narrative.
If the purse had not been touched, the attackers could not have found her address or threatened her with it. She had fabricated the detail in an effort to make her story sound more dramatic and believable. Detectives then dug deeper into Brittany's past. They contacted her former college teammates and coaches. Many described her as talented, but troubled. They recounted multiple incidents of missing money, stolen items, and her eventual expulsion from the team due to theft. At her former hotel job, managers described similar issues. These weren't minor behavioral problems. They formed a pattern of dishonesty, impulsivity, and fear of consequences. When detectives considered her history alongside the staged crime scene, her behavior after the attack, and the overwhelming forensic contradictions, they knew they were closing in on the truth. The evidence increasingly suggested that Brittany understood she might be investigated for the stolen leggings found in her bag. She feared the embarrassment, the disciplinary action, the possibility of being fired. That fear grew into paranoia, and paranoia into a catastrophic act of violence. Instead of facing a manageable workplace conflict, she committed one of the most brutal murders the area had ever seen. But the final breakthrough came during her follow-up interview. Detectives approached her calmly, presenting inconsistencies in her statement. Brittany, who had confidently repeated her story multiple times, began to show cracks. She couldn't explain the missing male DNA. She couldn't explain why no footprints were outside. She couldn't explain the tidy purse. She couldn't account for why her wounds were shallow, why certain tools were wiped clean, or why she had moved around the store after Jana's death. Eventually, detectives asked her one direct question. "Brittany, is it possible that no one else was in the store that night except you and Jana?" Her reaction was immediate: panic, anger, and refusal to engage. She didn't deny it with conviction, she simply shut down. That reaction was telling. Detectives left the room that day knowing they had the truth. What remained was gathering enough evidence to arrest her and prove in court what the investigation had already shown. There were never any masked men. The only attacker that night was Brittany Norwood.
Once detectives were confident that Brittany Norwood's story was a fabrication, the investigation entered its final phase, securing the evidence that would hold up in court and building the timeline that proved premeditation. By this point, every forensic analysis, witness testimony, and behavioral pattern pointed to one truth. There had been no masked men, no invasion, no random attack. What happened inside the Lululemon store was the result of a private confrontation that spiraled into a horrific act of violence, followed by a chillingly calculated effort to shift blame onto imaginary attackers. Investigators recreated the sequence of events leading up to the murder. Earlier that day, Jana had discovered a pair of Lululemon leggings, new, tagged, and clearly stolen, in Brittany's bag during the mandatory bag check. Store policy required her to report it, which she did. But instead of confronting Brittany directly, Jana followed procedure and informed the management team. What Jana did not know was that Brittany had already sensed that the situation was escalating. She knew management would investigate. She knew the truth would come out. And she feared losing yet another job because of theft. For someone with a history of stealing and being caught before, this fear triggered something dangerous. When the store closed at 9 p.m., Brittany left with the other employees but waited outside, stewing in panic and anger. After some time, she called Jana, pretending she had forgotten her Metro card inside the store. Jana, kind and responsible, agreed to return and help her. This decision placed her directly in harm's way. Based on evidence, investigators believed the confrontation began shortly after Jana unlocked the door. Jana likely reminded Brittany about the stolen leggings or questioned her. The argument escalated, turning heated.
The Apple Store employees later confirmed hearing two female voices arguing loudly, not the sounds of an armed robbery, but of a personal conflict between two women who knew each other. As tensions rose, Brittany grabbed the first tool within reach, a wrench or hammer, and struck Jana. Once the first blow landed, the scene descended into violence. Jana fought desperately. Defensive wounds covered her hands and arms, over 100 of them. She tried to escape, moving through different parts of the store, leaving blood trails that told a tragic story of resistance and fear. The attack stretched longer than most murders, nearly 20 minutes according to forensic estimates. Multiple tools were used, not because attackers brought them, but because Brittany kept switching weapons as her panic deepened. This pattern of violence was impulsive, frenzied, and driven by emotion, not coldly planned, but undeniably intentional. When Jana succumbed to her injuries, Brittany's fears shifted. Now she faced the consequences not only of theft, but of homicide. That's when her mindset shifted from panic to calculation. She moved Jana's car to make it appear as if unknown men had fled the scene. She ransacked the store, overturning mannequins and scattering clothes to simulate chaos. She carefully put on a pair of men's size 14 store shoes, stepping in blood to leave false tracks. She wiped certain tools to remove fingerprints, staged the clothing damage to mimic assault, and inflicted shallow cuts on her own body. Then she zip-tied herself in a position that appeared restrained but was loose enough for her to manage alone. After staging everything, she sat in the backroom bathroom for hours, waiting for someone to find her and bring her to safety. All of this required time, planning, and a surprising level of composure after committing a violent act. These actions showed not only deception, but careful thought, something prosecutors would later use to argue premeditation. When detectives reviewed her second interview, they noticed several unsettling details. Brittany remained calm, rehearsed, and consistent in her false account. But for investigators, her confidence was another red flag. Survivors of traumatic, violent events typically display signs of shock, confusion, fear, and emotional volatility. Brittany, however, seemed too controlled, too steady. It was the composure of someone telling a fabricated story, one she had practiced during the hours she spent alone overnight in the store she destroyed. As forensic evidence mounted, detectives brought the case to the state's attorney. The physical proof, DNA analysis, timeline, and behavioral findings formed an airtight case. On March 18, 2011, only 6 days after the murder, police arrested Brittany Norwood. Her demeanor changed drastically. Gone was the calm survivor persona. Now she was quiet, anxious, and withdrawn, perhaps realizing that her story had collapsed under the weight of hard evidence. During the trial, prosecutors argued that Brittany not only killed Jana, but attempted to manipulate the investigation from the beginning. They pointed out her history of theft, her escalating fear of exposure, and the lengths she went to stage the crime scene. The forensic team testified about footprints, blood spatter, DNA absence, and the staged bindings. Medical experts explained the difference between Jana's catastrophic wounds and Brittany's superficial injuries. Witnesses from the Apple Store recounted hearing only 2 voices, disproving any claim of armed intruders. The defense team attempted to argue that the murder was a crime of passion, not premeditation. They said Brittany panicked, acted impulsively, and staged the scene later out of fear. But the prosecution emphasized that staging a crime with such intricacy, moving the car, manipulating evidence, inflicting wounds, creating fake footprints, demonstrated intent, planning, and deception. After a short deliberation of just 1 hour, the jury found Brittany Norwood guilty of first-degree murder. In January 2012, she was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Judge Robert Greenberg condemned the brutality of the attack and expressed deep disappointment in the Apple Store employees who heard Janice's cries for help but did nothing. He pointed out that a life might have been saved had someone intervened. Following the trial, Brittany exhausted her appeals by 2015 and remains incarcerated at the Maryland Correctional Institute for Women. Jana's family, devastated but grateful for justice, created a memorial page to honor her legacy. They celebrated her adventurous spirit, her love for travel, and her commitment to kindness. They encouraged others to live boldly and compassionately, qualities Jana embodied throughout her life. The Lululemon murder case remains a chilling reminder of how fear, dishonesty, and impulse can escalate into irreversible tragedy. It also underscores the importance of workplace integrity, evidence-based investigations, and the devastating consequences of failing to act when someone cries for help. At its core, this case is not only a story of violence, but a story of betrayal. One coworker abusing the trust of another, leading to a heartbreaking, senseless loss.
If you're still here watching, thank you. Before you go, please subscribe to our channel, Dark Frame Stories, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another real-life mystery like this.